They say these medications will revolutionize the world of medicine, and I believe they're right. GLP-1s are the hottest topic in the health and wellness world right now, and for good reason. I've experienced their transformative power firsthand. These peptides have removed a lifelong struggle for me, the relentless pressure to lose weight or avoid gaining it, which I know majority of women, regardless of size, have had similar lifelong struggles. But let's be honest, GLP-1s don't come without their share of controversy. From media fear-mongering to the internet's relentless Ozempic bashing, there's even outright anger toward people who choose to use them. Why has this sparked such an uproar in our society? Are these medications dangerous? Do you really have to stay on them forever? And what about those sensational headlines? Are you destined for stomach paralysis or doomed to never poop again? Today, we're diving into these questions and more with a true expert in the field. Joining me is Dr. Gus Vickery, a board certified family physician and functional medicine practitioner who specializes in total body and mind optimization. In his practice, he combines health optimization, hormone therapy, and when appropriate, peptides like GLP-1s. He's an author, speaker, and the founder and directing physician of Authentic Health in Asheville, North Carolina. He established his practice with a commitment to delivering holistic, compassionate, and evidence-based care. He is an expert in the use of peptides, targeted supplementation, and hormonal optimization to potentiate an individual's best health. He's joining us today to help cut through the noise and get to the facts about these groundbreaking medications. For more information, you can find him at drgusvickery.com. So welcome, Dr. Gus.
Thank you, Karen. It's
You're
a
my kind of
privilege.
man.
It's such a privilege to be on the show with you. I'm really excited.
Yeah, me too. And I have to say, so we've been sitting here chatting for a while, and I just keep looking at you, and I got to say, you look great. You look really healthy and vibrant.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to hear that. That is, you know, I feel healthy and vibrant. I really
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, you're
I work,
practicing what
I
you're
work,
preaching.
yeah, I work at being healthy and vibrant. Take me back 10 years ago at age 45. After a 15-year hard sprint in healthcare, right? And look at me there. And you would not have thought I looked healthy and vibrant at that time.
Wow.
But that was like many people in any industry, but especially healthcare, where you've really put in the time and you're raising a family. I happened, to
Yes.
have 3 kids during that time. And you sacrifice your habit matrix and your investments in your health basically to these other priorities. I
Yeah.
know now I try to help people find a way through without having to sacrifice their health for the other priorities. I think there's a way that you can have it all, right? And feel really good. But at age 45, I was finally like, okay, I have got to find my way back to a good state of health. And so here I am.
Yeah, it's something that I really love and appreciate seeing is that person that's in midlife that looks just really vibrant and healthy, and you can like you just good skin color and happy and glowing and just it's like it makes me just because aging is associated with looking worse and having to do all of these things to make yourself look better, and sometimes it's just true health is really what is what looks best. It's not like, oh, how much Botox have you gotten, or how much weight have you lost, or whatever.
I love what you just said because I don't talk about this infrequently, right? Meaning it comes up and it's like there's a countenance of health. And that's independent of how specifically fit or muscular you are or not. What age are you? Do you have more wrinkles or less wrinkles? Any of those other factors. There is what you're describing is there's a countenance, an appearance of vitality and health
Yes.
that is just beautiful in its own way, regardless of whether it's an 80-year-old that has a lot of wrinkles because they've aged, or somebody who's carrying a little extra weight, but they're healthy, right? They were just
Yes.
to carry extra weight. And when I see that, like you and other people, it just totally resonates with me.
Yeah.
And it also, as you know, it really creates a level of emotional well-being where you're just more joyful more
Yeah.
peaceful, less reactive. And I'm maybe overstating it, but a lot of times I'm like, if there's like one domain of life that will pay you back in almost every other domain, it's your health. If you
Mhm.
have good health, then whether you find yourself in challenging circumstances, or you've got to figure out a new way to run your business. Like if you have all your brain power and physical capacities and everything working for you, you'll figure it out. You'll make it. You'll make it through those hard times, whereas it's very hard to do it if you're in a sick body or a de-energized body. But then our whole society would likely just get along better. If we were just
Yeah.
healthy, we just feel good.
Yes.
If we were all feeling good, we're probably just not going to fight over petty things any longer.
Yeah.
I took off on that one, but I really appreciate
But I
that.
appreciate that because that's exactly how I feel. And I always say true beauty is health to me. It's
Yes.
not, how much you've had done or that to me, it doesn't, no, it's got to shine from the inside. And that's the
Yeah.
true like health and beauty to me. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I
Well,
appreciate that.
thank
But
you. I take that
yeah,
as a very high compliment, what you shared
yeah,
with me. I really
yeah,
appreciate
absolutely. And I don't say that to people. So just so you know,
it.
it's not like I'm like buttering up all my guests here.
Well, maybe as we continue to our work, maybe we'll be able to say that to a whole lot more people, right?
Yes, yes,
They'll
let's hope
they'll have
so.
that countenance of health as well.
Yeah. And I wanted you on the show for that reason because when I heard you speaking on another person's podcast, I was like, wow, this guy has such a great attitude about how to incorporate these medications into a holistic plan to just overall better somebody's health and mindset. And so I feel like we do the same. We're very aligned with that here at our clinic where we want people to be able to use these medications in the best possible way because there is a lot of abuse and unfortunately that's causing a lot of the naysayers out there to bash people and for using them and I just don't think that that's appropriate.
Yeah. Anytime somebody is trying to improve their health in some way, shape, or form and feel better about themselves and they're accessing a tool that could help them, we shouldn't bash them for that and making them feel anyway bad about it. I do get how people could look at it like the individual, I know I hear this, they only needed to lose 7 or 8 pounds and they were already looking pretty good. But if that 7 or 8 pounds, and I'm not talking about body dysmorphia and getting inappropriately low weight and things like that, but if that 7 or 8 pounds was important to that person and
Yeah.
they used the tool the right way, like we're going to talk about, a holistic plan, and it gave them the leverage they needed to lose that 7 or 8 pounds and they feel better about themselves, then why would we fault that individual for doing that? I mean,
Yeah.
it's not cheating. What's cheating is what our society has done to us with food marketing and food selection and what are the available foods within a given food budget. That's the cheating, right? What's happened with our food industry and chemical industry and pharma industry to put us in a position where every day it's a battle just to nourish our body in a healthy way. It's not cheating to go use a tool that helps you unwind a lot of the entrainment into your mind and body of your prior eating habits.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing is people are so quick to judge. And I think, would you say the same thing to somebody that chose to go on an antidepressant? Would you
Yeah.
say to them like, well, you're cheating, do the
Hmm.
work, like just train your brain to be a happier person and get out there and get outside and get some exercise and do the things that help improve serotonin? And then if that person chose to have an antidepressant instead because they needed it or because they wanted that helping hand, would we react the same way?
Hmm.
No.
That's a good question. I hadn't thought about it that way, but that's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, it is because we know that eating behavior and eating addiction is getting worse and worse and worse thanks to what you just said, like all the chemicals that are being put in the food and we're being bombarded by all of these like high reward foods that trigger all of these chemical responses and make us extremely addicted to the food themselves and then our society just in general drives us to look to food to make us feel better and give us that dopamine hit. It's a drug. And we
Yeah.
have to look at this as a problem.
It's a problem because it's a drug we can't avoid, meaning that we
Yeah.
have to eat. We don't have to drink alcohol. We don't have to use nicotine. We don't have to use other drugs. Addiction is very challenging. I've cared for a lot of people with addictions. I'm very
Yeah.
compassionate about that. But
Same.
ultimately, you will live a healthier, happier life without those drugs. We have to eat food. There's no avoiding it. And therefore, the um, the seeding of a lot of commonly available foods with addictive levels of sugar and fat and flavor enhancers and MSG is a terrible thing to do to humans.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it was, I'm not, again, the food engineer who came up with novel techniques to make food addictive. They're just doing their job, right? They were hired by a food company to figure out these things. I don't know that anybody 30 or 40 years ago could have necessarily estimated the actual public health impact. I have to think if they could have, maybe they would have backed off of it and said, "No, let's
Hmm.
not do that. Let's not make an entire population, including the children, sick
Uh,
because we manipulated food and then also
yeah.
poisoned it with chemicals just to make it easier to produce more of it, where we're literally poisoning in a slow, steady way our own children, right? We're poisoning their gut and we're poisoning their body while we're getting addicted to the foods and not providing the nutrient density that's needed for that body to function. It's a terrible, terrible thing that's
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And so when these GLP-1s kind of came on board, how did you feel about them and why did you decide to start incorporating them into your practice?
Well, initially, my introduction to them was in the drug form, meaning these are peptides, but they're marketed as drugs, pharmaceutical
Hmm.
agents. They're still peptides. And this was for treatment of, type 2 diabetes. That's where we started. And we treat diabetic patients in my practice. Now, we focus on reversing diabetes, which obviously can be done, so we're always on a path of let's see how we can begin to unwind this and restore normal metabolic signal and function, talking about type 2 diabetes more specifically. But at the same time, we're going to use if someone's got dysregulated blood glucose and it's causing damage to myelin and nerve and retina and kidney, we want to go ahead and stabilize that. So we're going to use therapeutics, medications in cases of diabetes. So these came onto the marketplace, and the original iterations of them were daily. There was an oral version. It wasn't that effective. And then we had our dailies. But what we began to see for those who could tolerate, which tolerance was very low with those first iterations of GLPs. The
Which was
GLP
when? Like when did those come out on?
2014,
Okay,
15.
so like 10
Yeah.
years ago.
So
Yeah.
yeah, semaglutide was 2017.
Okay.
So we're 8 years in. So we began to use these in our practice. And at that time, what I was doing was, kind of the standard application. We'd start a patient on it and we'd dose escalate and then we'd follow their hemoglobin A1C. And of course, observe that they also lost weight and they were less hungry. And that's where, of course, observing the impact on body weight was where they began to move towards let's research these for as potential solutions for obesity or people who are significantly overweight. And it was a kind of a mixed bag because I can't remember the percent, but it was not a heavy majority that could tolerate the therapeutic at the drug level doses. Meaning, if we titrated them up automatically with, say, Ozempic or semaglutide to a milligram, they
Hmm.
were going to experience, gastrointestinal symptoms and other challenges. Not necessarily dangerous, like often is like, there's a lot of hyperbole around it, but it was definitely uncomfortable for them. And so it was kind of a mixed bag on tolerance. What at that time, back if you take me back to the mid 2010 to 20 range, I didn't have the same understanding that I have now around nutritional sufficiency, and that we had such a big problem in our population with nutritional insufficiency. I hadn't
Hmm.
seen the kind of data that I've been able to really look at over the last 7 or 8 years in patients where we're looking at more comprehensive evaluations, including over the last 3 to 4 comprehensive intra and extracellular nutrient evaluations. And when I began to see that situation, like for say 90% of the people who came in to see me as a new patient, including sometimes a younger person who wanted to get just a good assessment, I was shocked. I was shocked at what I was seeing in terms of insufficiency across the B vitamin spectrum, fat solubles, phospholipids, essential fatty acids. And I honestly questioned, could this really be true? Could this really represent our population? It's just no way we're all walking around in this state. So these aren't necessarily, some of them were outright deficient, but there's a difference between, say, deficiency and insufficiency. Deficiency is you were truly medically deficient in a given nutrient. And if you go far enough down the road with that, you'll eventually get diseases associated with that nutrient deficiency.
Yeah.
Insufficiency would be you have enough of it to stay alive, but you don't have enough of it to perform well. You're
Yeah.
going to
To
be your
thrive.
yeah, your energetic capacities are going to be limited, by the availability of essential micronutrients, period. So as I begin to wrap my mind around that, and we begin to say, hey, if we're going to put you on, for one, all patients, but let's just focus in on people who might be using a GLP-1. If we're going to put you on a therapeutic that's going to reduce your food volume, and at baseline you're already nutritionally insufficient, then we're going to absolutely focus on nutritional sufficiency, meaning we will through supplementation, food selection, however we're going to get it done. If you're using this therapeutic and you're eating less food, you will not. We're going to make sure your body doesn't lack for essential macro and micronutrients. And what we begin to see then was that, one, you could use much lower doses because nutritional deficiency and insufficiency drives hunger. It drives food seeking behavior. It's not, food addiction is its own thing, but hunger is greatly impacted by the nervous system seeking to solve nutritional challenges, especially in the area of essential amino acids and essential fatty acids. So if you're protein insufficient, most people are, and
Yes.
you also are essential fatty acid deficient, and most people are, your nervous system is already primed to seek food. You're already
Yes.
more hungry because your body is trying to solve a different problem than you are necessarily understanding with your approach to food. Your body is saying, hey, with food, we've got energy, hydrocarbons, we need that, right? So we need the energy. But if you're significantly overweight, you're actually trying to use some of your own energy. And that's part of the problem we're trying to solve. So we have the hydrocarbon piece of food, proteins, carbs, fats, mostly carbs and fats. But the other component of the food was the essential macro and micronutrients, unique molecules, right? Unique molecules that are the basis of the structure and function of the human system. The actual structure and function of the system is based on that, not the hydrocarbons. To most, there's a little exaggeration there. There's a little, but, and so, if you are, so your nervous system is actually seeking more than it is seeking. The higher priority sensors in the gut are not for calories, they are for essential nutrients, right?
Nutrients.
Because from an ancestral perspective, we have, until we get to like serious, malnourishment, so to speak, we have reserve energy systems. We can go, a lean person can go weeks in a relatively healthy functioning state without a lot of energy input. But once we start running out of essential nutrients, structure and function is now compromised. And that's really stressing out the body because it's very hard to survive when structure and function is compromised.
Yeah.
So as I began to really get my mind around that aspect of eating and say, with every patient, we're addressing that. Like we're going to see to it that we can solve this side of the equation. Then what we found was that already their drive to eat was reduced. And in fact, patients who didn't have, maybe they need to lose 20 pounds, we often found that they didn't even need to use any extra tools, that once they optimized protein and nutrients, that their tendency to overeat was resolved. They were satisfied, they were good.
Yeah.
And it's so critical for people to understand this, right,
Yeah.
about food. I don't know the situation in Canada with your mass agriculture, but in the US, the vast majority of food that you can get in a grocery store right now, even the healthier versions, just don't contain the nutrient density
No.
necessary to maintain
Yeah.
our human systems. And it's not just that the nutrient density of the food has reduced, it's that our gut function has reduced, our gut biome
Hmm.
has been altered by the food. And then our levels of stress, our levels of toxicant exposure, everything, so many aspects of our modern life that are just what it is, right? We got to deal with it as it is. We're consuming a lot more of the nutrients that we're pulsing into our body. Water soluble nutrients, when you consume them, they're delivered into tissues and then they're used, right? So you get a little bump in a biochemical direction because, oh, we've got these various catalysts and we can run these reactions and your body responds to that, but then it consumes them and then that's done, right? And so this consistent and so if the system is working harder all the time in different capacities, detox, etc., you're burning through a lot more of these nutrients because most of them are not recycled. Most of them are just consumed in a chemical reaction. I kind of went off on a tangent there, I
Oh,
think.
I
So,
like your tangents, Gus. That's great.
yeah. Back to the question. So we began deploying these to treat diabetes. We saw phenomenal results, and the
Mhm.
people came back so excited because they were less hungry and they had lost 8 or 9 pounds. And that was without us even introducing them to a body composition protocol. That was just purely
Right.
the effect of these drugs slash peptides. As we got to the weekly option, like semaglutide, tolerance went way up. People didn't have to inject themselves every day. The side effect profile was preferred. And then we started seeing amazing results. And also with our clinic, where we're using a DEXA to precisely follow body
Ah,
composition, I can tell you that what we almost universally observe is no loss of lean mass. If there is some, it's negligible. While people lose substantial amounts of excess body fat. We're not seeing this problem of people losing, 60-40 fat and muscle, like, the
yeah.
studies. And I
Yeah.
believe it ties right back to what we're talking about, the nutritional sufficiency piece, having enough protein, all of those types of things.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not the drugs themselves, it's what you're eating that's going to be causing that muscle loss. And I think people really need to start to separate that because it's all lumped into, oh, it's Ozempic, it's semaglutide that is causing the muscle loss. And that's
No,
not the case. It's not
no,
the
it isn't.
peptide.
A state where you're low calorie, low protein, low nutrient, right, is going to lead to muscle loss no matter what else you do. However, even if you attend to those things, and we'll talk about this leg of the stool or leg of the table later, but if you're not creating a stimulus for muscle growth, you will still, in a low calorie state, begin to lose muscle.
Yeah.
You'll lose less if you have enough protein. You won't lose as much, but ultimately, you do have to create a stimulus in a low calorie state for the nervous system to basically regulate things towards we're keeping our muscle. Your body is responding to the signals it gets, period. That's what it's doing.
Yeah.
And it's giving the best possible outputs it can in response to the inputs, always. Right. And so
Yeah.
if the inputs if the necessary inputs, meaning the things the body has to have to function well, air, water, nutrients, sleep, are there, right? Then you're going to, have your best chance at expressing a robust state of health. But then you also get into the wrong inputs, toxicants, et cetera, that are getting into our body, stress, excessive stress, negative thinking loops, lack of sleep, rest, recovery. So that's working against it. Right? So you have to have what's essential. You need to minimize what's harmful. But then if you really want to express your best health, then you have to go beyond essential into, cold exposure, hot exposure, periodic fasting and training and all these other things that allow us to recover capacities that our more remote ancestors had that we lost.
Yes. Yeah. Very interesting. Um, the mechanisms of action from this drug just boggle my mind. And I think
Mhm.
that from what I've heard is they're not even sure exactly all the things that these medications, these peptides are actually doing. And I think that a lot of people think that it's just the suppression of hunger that causes the weight loss. But I'll tell you from my own experience, like I lost the weight and then I went to a maintenance dose, very small micro dose. And that's all I've had to do for a year and a half now. I have gone back to eating a normal amount of calories every single day. And I am not perfect and I will never claim to be. I still like my ice cream and I still, like those little things, little treats here and there. So by no means have I been super restrictive. I'm still working out the same. I have not gained any weight back. And so to me, that's just like, what? And a lot of people will panic when they start these medications because a month in or 2 months in, they'll say, I'm not getting the appetite suppression anymore. And it's
Mhm.
like, it goes away. That part seems to go away. Even the food, the transit time of food In the beginning is very slowed, but even that in the research shows that it actually starts to speed up the longer you're on it. And so those mechanisms start to go away. And then you'll hear things from people like I just had a woman say to me, you know what I've noticed the most since starting this is that I no longer have hamster brain. She said I used to stress constantly all day long. She's a business owner. And she said, my brain's just so quiet. And
Mhm.
it's like, how is it? What? You know, like, so we hear all these strange things, and it's like, how is this medication working? Because that to me just makes no sense. How does somebody go back to eating the same amount of calories that they were prior to the weight loss? Because any time before this medication came to market, that you couldn't do that. You
Mhm.
lost the weight on a calorie deficient diet, and as soon as you went back to eating a normal amount of calories, typically the weight would come back.
Yeah, that is correct. So one is that if if your calorie intake was exceeding your energy expenditure, you would regain weight, right? So part of it is that yeah, you normalized your eating because you had normal satiety, your satiety function was back to a normal state, your hunger and all of that. So, provided that you were maintaining a healthy balance of energy expenditure and energy in, and obviously keeping balanced hormones and getting your sleep and all these other factors that influence our body weight beyond just what we eat and how much we move. If you do that, then you're going to be stable. That's how your body is programmed. It's going to respond to that. Those are good inputs, and it's going to say we're at a stable weight mode. So and when you're in a stable weight mode in the energy balance thermostat, so to speak. They've called it the lipostat. I think of it as a more comprehensive energy balance thermostat in your hypothalamus, which is taking in all these inputs over time and saying, okay, and it's basically making decisions around your metabolic rate, which will, of course, it's influencing hormonal axis, thyroid, reproductive others, and all that. And then it's also making decisions around how much fat is a healthy reserve that we should have. Right. And so there was very rarely the opportunity to have unhealthy excess fat through most of human history. That
Mhm.
just didn't happen very often. So there's not a lot of programming around that in our human system. What we were programmed around was food scarcity and how we survive with less food. Right? That's where most of our programming falls. So what I know this much, and this is very general, is that in the central nervous system, GLP-1 receptors have a number of impacts. There's a lot of receptors for GLP-1 in your brain. And we know that there are receptors at the hypothalamic level where that energy balance center, that processing is going on. And it appears to be favorable in terms of hunger, central nervous system hunger drive is reduced. It's not just satiety is increased because your stomach empties slower. There is a central nervous system level. There's some type of modulation of the dopamine interplay into that center where we have that reward seeking behavior because I know you know about the data
Mhm.
emerging regarding reduced craving and addictive type behaviors of all
Yeah.
sorts, including the use of alcohol or other things that theoretically these drugs should not be influencing. And so it does appear to catalyze in some way, I can't tell you exactly how, a normalization of that energy balance regulation back to what's healthy, right? Because
Mm.
a person who for 20 or 30 years, and this is really common for women who had multiple pregnancies, and they just keep finding themselves a little heavier, a little heavier, a little
Yeah.
heavier. And out there in their 40s, and they had three babies, three kids, and now they've got 40 extra pounds, and no matter what they do, it just doesn't seem to budge, right? Well, over time, what's happened is their energy balance center is now regulating them to that, right? That's what
Yeah. That's the
it's
set
saying.
point.
Yeah, this is normal, right? This is where
Yeah.
we're supposed to be. And as far as the brains, and even if they have insulin resistance and inflammate all these problems from the excess fat, that's not what the energy balance center is doing. It's just saying this is where and that signaling is through leptin and adiponectin and insulin and possibly also GLP, right? And so in order to get the nervous system to adapt to a lower set point, right? To actually change its programming to a lower set point, one, we have to get it to go there, first of all,
Mhm.
which is often why in your 40s, like nudging it using, just little inputs. So I'm going to eat
Yes.
a little less sugar and I'm going to move more. You become healthier. That's good for you. You may lose 2 or 3 pounds, but you rarely see substantial changes in body composition from just little nudges like that. So that's where
Hmm.
we have to really push in hard. We have to give it a shove. We have to say, this is where you're going to go. You're going to begin to catabolize the hydrocarbons we have stored in our body for energy, right? We're going to have to do that. There is no other choice. And of course, that you set the conditions to make that happen, which is you keep your metabolic rate up through daily activity, but also physical activity, and you eat less food, meaning you provide less energy. You create a energy deficit. Your body has to fill that somehow eventually. But its first move mechanisms to do that, other than release a little bit of fat, or to slow metabolic rate down.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh
It's
yeah,
so
make
mean.
it. Yeah, I know. Oh, and then also possibly make you hungry because it's trying to recover. So what we see with GLP-1s, you can take an individual, that has been stuck, and a lot of times we'll introduce them to our body composition protocol, which, by the way, is written up in an ebook, and your listeners can have all the access they want to that ebook to understand the logic behind it, how it's working with body design. We'll introduce them to our body comp protocol, and they'll say, you know what, I think I can do this. And I've been nutrient insufficient as far as I know for the last 15 years. So let me find out what it's like to just have a body that has all the essential nutrients it needs. And let me see what happens. And they may go 1 or 2 months down the road doing it all the right way, but just not have meaningful changes in body composition.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just not happening. Now, there's a lot of confounders. It can be heavy toxicant burden. It can be
Yeah.
hormonal imbalances and that's why you have a holistic plan. You're not just attending to the few variables that, are the big movers of body composition. You're attending to comprehensive health, right? You're setting up the system to do well, to be healthy, period. Because even if you lose a lot of weight, if in the end you have a sick system still, you don't arrive at the point that you want it to be. So we'd have these individuals that apply it all and they're not moving. We'd finally say, okay, let's add the GLP. Now they're already in a calorie deficit. They have been disciplined, they're food cataloging. We know it. We know they're not cheating, right? They've created a calorie deficit, but their body is just not responding. And they've tried to work out harder, but they just get tired. We'll add the GLP. And then the next thing you know, within a few weeks, it all just starts to go in the right direction. And the only thing I could say about that is because they didn't reduce their eating any further, right? They were already in a calorie deficit. The only variable that shifted was we added the signal of GLP-1. And
Yeah.
so, from my perspective, it had to catalyze changes in the central nervous system around energy balance regulation that allowed the nervous system to begin to program a different body composition. It allowed it to go there. Now, some of that will potentially be also improvements in response to insulin if that person was insulin resistant because it's working at the pancreatic level. But I think a lot of that really has to do with these anti-inflammatory properties that we're seeing. I think that
Yeah.
it is not subtle, the mechanisms for reducing neuroinflammation and oxidative stress. Right. And so most people are walking around with like at least a low level of neuroinflammation, as well as higher levels of oxidative stress in the brain that are very hard to measure with any conventional lab studies that we have. Why? Because they're stressed. They're driving their brain very hard. We're looking at screens. They're probably not getting enough sleep. And so all of those cells in the brain, all those mitochondria where you're making your energy are constantly working. It means they're constantly producing exhaust, meaning oxidants, reactive oxygen species, and the body's capacity to clean up that exhaust is overwhelmed. You just
Yeah.
don't have enough glutathione and nitric oxide and catalase and all the other things that would ultimately, as you're flowing carbon and oxygen through a mitochondria to make energy, as you're doing that, if you can keep up with the exhaust of that combustion, you can keep flowing that energy through there, right? Like it'll just keep on moving. But if that exhaust, so to speak, builds up, I'm using exhaust as sort of like a
Yeah.
metaphor
Yeah. Yeah.
term, then eventually that mitochondria is bogged down. And not only that, you start to punch holes in the mitochondrial membranes, right? So they become really their capacities are just rendered nil. And then there's inflammatory response to this, which affects neurotransmitter balance, which affects mood, which affects motivation, right? Which affects your sense of well-being. All those factors come together, make a person more likely to give in to cravings, more likely to seek a drug or a substance just to feel better, right?
Hmm.
So that's the baseline for most people right now.
Yeah.
That's where they're
It
starting
is.
from, right? And so GLP-1s reduce neuroinflammation and ultimately through other mechanisms reduce that oxidative stress load. Optimizing nutrient availability at least sees to it that your body can keep synthesizing glutathione, keep producing catalase, keep producing superoxide, continue to make nitric oxide, so you're not running out. The situation right now, as we discussed the nutrient insufficiency piece, because your antioxidant systems and enzymes are built out of essential nutrients. That's what they're made out of. So if you are depleted in those essential nutrients, you're going to run your antioxidant capacities are going to run low, meaning your energetic capacity, your ability to actually produce energy in your body is going to be capped. All right,
Yeah.
that's your mitochondrial efficiency. So an average person is walking around with maybe 50% efficiency of their mitochondria. They optimize nutrients. Now their body can manage the exhaust better and they can jump up to 60, 70% right there. Just a notable improvement in energy availability by simply optimizing the nutrient piece. I keep getting back
Or
to
do
that.
we have GLPs? Like, do they directly affect the mitochondria?
I don't know if there's a direct
Okay.
mitochondrial impact. That's a great question.
Yeah.
As far as I know, and I was just doing a literature search today since we were doing this podcast, just looking at mechanisms. Haven't seen anything where there's like a direct signal impact on mitochondria, but they do work on NRF2, NF kappa beta. They work on there's a lot, and I'd have to go back and actually read it again. It's that whole inflammatory cascade process, which is absolutely going to have direct and indirect effects on mitochondrial performance. But I
So
don't
the
think the
GO
GL. Yeah, go
they
ahead.
actually directly affect though the systems in the body that create inflammation. Would that be a good
Yes.
way to put
Yeah,
it?
that's correct. And so by if you are dealing with dysregulated inflammatory milieu in your brain, your mitochondria will not perform as well as
Right.
their potentials are reduced. Not only that, they're damaged. Like yeah, again,
Yeah.
you literally are punching holes in the membranes of the mitochondria.
Wow.
And then if you're deficient in essential fatty acids and phospholipids that make up those mitochondrial membranes, you can't repair them. Right. Like so
Mm.
now you're really stuck.
Yeah, and I hear too that we've got GLP-1 receptors on immune cells, and that's why they're
Yes,
seeing it working very well for autoimmune, which I would
yes,
think that in and of itself then is going to help lower inflammation.
yes. Yes, if you go to a table that just shows what's been studied and quantified, qualified
Yeah,
around activate GLP on any given tissue, cartilage, muscle, liver, heart, kidney, brain, anywhere where GLP, and it's most systems of the body have receptors, reducing inflammatory response and improving immune balance. It's really improving immune balance is what it's doing, is
wow.
part of every single one of those tissues, every one of them. Right. And so that to me is the biggest possible opportunity with GLPs is looking at them from the standpoint of managing immune imbalances causing chronic inflammatory issues in human systems. And I think that's
Yes.
a lot of the reason why that people just feel if they're properly dosed, right?
Yes.
And they're given the right protocol to take care of their gut and digestive function, and they're given the right protocol to see to it that their nutrient environment is optimal, right? If
Yeah.
those things are attended to, then once they're on their GLP, they will generally just feel better.
Yeah.
They just feel
Yeah.
better.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many people in our group that are, one girl's using it to keep endometriosis at bay. She's
Yeah.
like, it's gotten so much better. And she said, as soon as I lower the dose, she's like, to a really tiny dose, because she doesn't want to lose weight anymore. She's like, it starts to come back. And she's really healthy and she's doing everything possible. And so she's like, I'm going to use this to help with this. Because
Yeah.
endometriosis is very autoimmune in nature. They do think that it could be classified as an autoimmune condition. But skin issues are getting better, and gut integrity seems to get better on GLPs as well, which then, of course, is going to help with inflammation in the brain and inflammation, systemic
Yeah.
inflammation, and food sensitivities. So it's incredible to me just how many things that it's hitting on, not
Yeah.
just weight loss.
Yes. So, then you could ask the question, so why all of these reports of, decent, like meaningful percentages of people whose skin look worse, who feel worse, who lose muscle, lose bone. gut function deteriorated, right? So why? And you and I would both say they're not using a holistic protocol to
Yeah.
account for all these other very important variables that maintain muscle and bone and gut function, all of that. They're just simply getting put on it. They dose titrate it up until they're not hungry anymore because they want freedom from hunger. They've been driven by it for a long time, and it's a
Yeah.
wonderful thing for them to have. But they
Yeah.
dose titrate up. They greatly reduce their food volume and they become substantially malnourished. I'm not just talking about calorie malnourished because they probably still have calories available in their body. They become nutrient malnourished. And that's why they end up without the same result we're talking about.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. And I've heard that they're trying to get approval to get even higher doses allowed.
Yeah, I
And
mean, like,
it's like, whoa, down. Like, I don't know about you, but if a woman has to go past just, let's say we're talking about tirzepatide or semaglutide, the 1.5 milligrams semaglutide and maybe 5 milligrams tirzepatide, if you're having to go past that, I usually see that as there's something else going on or you're not doing something.
different problem. The only exception to that would be people who have lifelong severe obesity, right?
Yeah.
And significant diabetes. Then you may have to create a very powerful signal in their system and continue to
Right.
amplify the signal to get them where they want to go. We also know that most people with obesity and diabetes have very low levels of endogenous GLP-1. They just aren't
Mm,
producing GLP-1. So to some extent, we're
hmm.
using replacement, but we're replacing at very high doses. You take that exception out, that
Okay.
population, then you're exactly right. If they're moving and if they're getting beyond a 10 milligram equivalent with tirzepatide or a 1 milligram dose of semaglutide, and they're not experiencing the results they wish, then there's other factors at play there. And again, it could be hormone issues that aren't
Hmm.
being
Yeah.
it could be excessive toxicant burden in the body and ongoing exposure, which is causing the fat cells to simply say, we're not opening up, right? We're not releasing our contents because there's a lot of bad stuff in here. And we don't have
Mm,
a way of dealing with that way. We're not in a position to deal with that. We're going to damage the body. And it could be high inflammation, which also is it affects the fat efflux from fat cells. It'll cause the body to retain and hold on to fat. So there are a lot of other reasons why they might be stuck. They might not be getting adequate sleep. Their stress
hmm.
axis may be wrecked, and they're having challenges in that particular area. And then finally, they just aren't nutrient optimized, right? The body can't go where you want it to go because it doesn't have the essential substrates for structure and function. I hope the audience is getting this message, right? Because it's like I teach it all the
It's
time now
huge.
for your children, for any,
Yes.
right? Like if you're part of a regenerative farming community and they're like, the soil and the soil biome has been restored, and that there's like really good nutrient density and the livestock that are grazing and eating, it's all natural, and you can get all your food from that like area, then you probably will be okay. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. But
probably.
how many
Yeah.
people are
Uh,
doing that?
yeah. But eating clean is critical.
It
Minimizing the
is.
poison. We got to stop poisoning ourselves and poisoning our children with our food. In the United States, it's a really big problem with glyphosate, organophosphates, it's just bad. And I've run full toxicant panels on all new patients, and I
Hmm.
have for years. And we see at baseline what is the toxic environment like? It's horrible. It's really,
Terrible.
really bad. Yeah, and so we have to have a plan to deal with that. And part of that mitigation is stop eating and drinking poison, period, right? Like just go ahead. And so we're like, yeah, non-GMO, organic, look for these things on labels. And yeah, there's some cheating around that. But generally speaking, if you eat clean, what that does mean is you will have less toxins to deal with. But that doesn't necessarily mean more nutrient density, because a lot of the larger organic farms, I'm not criticizing them, they're producing food in a way that at least it's not poisoned, but their land is still just stripped of nutrient and nutrient
Yes.
density. So you're not getting that nutrient density. So you eat clean and you try to eat variety and you try to get everything you can. But my experience in the United States testing this in, if not thousands of patients now, is that
Yeah.
virtually everyone has to be on some form of nutritional supplementation to
Yeah.
make sure that.
Yep, yep. You can't get it from the food, like you said, unless you're homesteading and you know
Mhm.
exactly where it's coming from and you're growing everything yourself. You're likely nutrient deficient.
Yes. So all these pathways of catabolizing energy from fat, they involve essential nutrients, right? So
Hmm.
it's so many factors. So we
Yeah.
talked about the managing
Yeah.
the oxidative stress, the cellular exhaust, keeping healthy membranes, all of that. All of it is dependent upon you actually have what you need to just maintain that system.
And so would you agree that if somebody's just keeps plateauing or they're not losing weight and they just keep increasing that dose, like that's a should be a big red flag saying, no, no, there's something else going on. It's not a matter of needing more of this peptide. It's there's start looking under the hood and figure out why you're not losing weight on these smaller doses. And I want to get into the whole microdosing
Yeah.
thing too, and if you're using some of that kind of
So we
theory.
rarely, I mean, we've got, I don't know how, I mean, we could flash up DEXAs and I could show you before and after DEXAs on a ton of people. And some of them have lost 100 pounds. You know, a lot of them have lost anywhere from 30 to 50 pounds. Many of them have lost that like 30 or 40 pounds while they added 15 or 20 pounds of muscle, possibly, right? Some just kept their muscle and lost fat. Rarely, in almost all of those cases, we've never advanced beyond a a 1 milligram dose of semaglutide or a 10 milligram dose of tirzepatide. And that's rare to be at 1 in 10. We are typically at starting doses to next dose up. So we're typically at 0.25 milligrams of semaglutide up to zero point 0.5 and 2.5 to 5 of tirzepatide. And
Yeah.
we're seeing this type of result, 40 pounds of fat loss, you know, while we gain muscle. So if you're having to keep dose increase, and if you're finding that it's hunger, a lot of times people go up on the dose, but they're not really hungry. They just think, okay, if I
Hmm.
just go up on the dose, maybe I'll finally start losing some fat, but it doesn't really work that way. Yes, it
Hmm.
helps catalyze the energy balance system. Yes, it does all these things, but higher dose, it's not a direct lipolysis effect. It's not that GLP is just saying, okay, we're just going to burn fat. Like, and so just amplifying that signal isn't going to guarantee that. And so if it's not that you're hungry and nothing's happening for you, but at first, are you following the protocol, right? So we have individuals and maybe they have some success and they stall. And the first thing we do, can I go up on my dose? Well, possibly, but let's talk about it. And we
Hmm.
inventory their protein target, their calorie target, and their physical activity targets. And almost always we find that there's been attrition in those areas. So they just, you know, they've kind of fallen off a little bit. And so they're not maintaining the same level of intensity of workouts. They're not doing muscle training and or they've been a little more permissive with what they're putting into their body or they're not hitting their protein target or all three. And that's going to, of course, impact results. We go back and say, create the right inputs for your body to do what you're trying for it to do, right? And then let's see if you need an increased dose of the GLP-1. They typically don't. If they're hungry and it's like, I'm really hungry, then we're looking at, are you nutrient optimized? Are you protein optimized? Because if you're not, then you're going to stay
Kind of
hungry
craving.
at any
Yeah.
dose because your nervous system is going to override that signal and say, we've got to eat. Because that's the only way it knows to go find essential nutrients is to seek food. That's been its programming for all of the human and history is we get it through food. Problem now is you keep going and eating food, but you're actually not solving the nutrient problem.
Hmm. Have you read the book Eat Like the Animals?
I have not read that book.
Oh, well, Gus, you're going to have to read it. I interviewed the authors and it's great book, great guys. I loved them. They're from Australia. They study animals, but basically through their research on animals and how animals were driven to eat, they realized that humans were exactly the same and how we will seek out eating more food and more calories is typically, and if we're eating carbs, we will eat more carbs to try to get to a protein
Mhm.
like threshold, basically. Like we want to get your body will seek food till it meets where it wants to like get enough protein coming in.
That's it. Yeah, it's looking for the protein more than anything else. It's looking for protein.
And you'll
Uh,
overeat the carbs because we hardly have any protein in carbs in most cases. And so you'll overeat that because your body is telling you, eat more, eat more, eat more. I need more protein. So if you
yes.
just ate the protein and met that
Yeah.
nutrient.
The body is brilliantly designed,
It
incredible.
is.
Our capacities, our resiliency, it's remarkable what human beings are capable of cognitively, physically, emotionally, spiritually. Like it's remarkable what our
It
capacities
is.
are. What's happened is that programming wasn't really designed for our modern food environment, right? It
Yeah.
just wasn't. But that's okay because we have adaptive systems and we can get the best of both worlds where we have the progress. We're not going to be threatened by, necessarily shifts in cold or hot. And we're not going to end up starving and dying from, not being able to get to food. Like at least in where you live and where I live, we've got we end up cutting ourselves with our chainsaw trying to cut a tree. We can go in and surgeons can repair the muscle and there's a lot of wonderful things to our progress that allow us to live longer lives. And that's all good. And then if we just simply go back and create the inputs the human system was designed around, then we can regain all those capacities and we can become what we are designed to be, robust, resilient, high-performing beings, not chronically sick, chronically de-energized. Like it's there, but we just have to get back to the inputs. We have to say, do a really good inventory on what are my inputs, and that's across. I'm sure you teach your patients this all the time. So across stress and sleep and recovery and nutrients and physical activity and types of physical activity, and then you get deeper into hot and cold and photobiomodulation, so
Hmm.
sunlight, grounding, earthing, right? All of these things you have to
Yep.
do inventory. And then you have to figure out which ones do I have dialed in, right? And which ones am I missing? And what are the ones that are the inputs that are coming in that are hurting me, that are eroding my health and taking me in the wrong direction? And then you begin to shift all those inputs. For people struggling with weight and metabolic issues, a big portion of those inputs is how much they're eating, what is their fitness. Those are big inputs to that. Toxins are an input. Sleep is an input, important one. Stress is an input. But the biggest is ultimately how the food that's coming into that body and the energy expenditure. And so for those individuals, the GLP-1s are awesome, awesome,
Yeah.
awesome because of the way they can help them kind of fix those areas of inputs. Because those have also notoriously been the hardest one to fix is how do I change my eating behavior consistently over time in the food environment that I've been, reared in and trained in, all of that. I
Yeah.
don't know if you see this, but what I see is on the other side, when people have arrived at this new state of health and well-being and this healthier body composition, their old attachments to whatever it was, whatever poor quality, they're just kind of gone. They just don't care that much. It's not like the rest of their life they're fighting to sustain the disciplines that they utilized to get where they're going. Those disciplines have become ingrained, and the reward of those disciplines, well-being, health, absence of disease, are sufficient enough for them just to say, I'm going to keep these inputs going. And so we don't have to like constantly coach people on the other side so they don't fall off the cliff and go right back to where they started. It's just this is just what they do now.
No, absolutely. And we get the demographic that I think is really forgotten about in this world of weight loss, which is women that are really healthy and they really are doing everything right. And I was one of those people where I ate perfectly. I didn't drink, I exercised, I prioritized protein, I optimized my hormones. But you hit midlife, and that menopausal, perimenopausal weight gain is really some of the most stubborn weight. And it
Yeah.
can be 10 pounds, it can be 20 pounds, 30 pounds. But I've talked to women who were, their set point was 120 pounds their entire life. And then they hit perimenopause. And in 1 year, they packed on 15, 20 pounds. And they're just like, what? And no matter what they do, they can't get it all off. And
And
so,
that distribution of that weight is different. They tend to
oh,
get around their abdomen where they didn't have it before.
exactly.
Yeah.
All visceral fat, which then is just perpetuates the problem, perpetuates metabolic disease. And they can do it all right and optimize the hormones and they still can't get it off. And I was one of those, I've always had that weight loss resistance. It didn't matter if I went down to 500 calories and worked out for 3 hours a day, my body would not move in weight. And so having a microdose or a smaller dose of these GLPs, it was all my body needed. And it's what we have seen now with hundreds of our members that have just been like, I just need this to get this menopausal weight off. And they're just so grateful and so happy about it. And then on top of that, the inflammation's gone because that's another thing that happens with menopause is you get inflamed.
Yeah. Irritable.
And irritable and yeah, many other things. Yeah.
My wife is 56 and she's wonderful, beautiful, healthy. We have a great marriage, but she went through it. Now, it was a very short period of time before I had her set up with someone to get her onto hormone replacement therapy, knowing what I know about aging. So she was able to, but she definitely had that experience of what's changed? What's wrong? She's a real, just naturally happy, ebullient person, and now all of a sudden she's just grumpy and
Yeah.
hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then she got back into a balanced, reproductive hormone state, and suddenly there she is again. Her
Yes.
happy-go-lucky self. Yeah, so
Yeah.
we can't overstate how important these signals are in human
Hmm.
systems. And I do believe that in states like that, menopause, when you've been overweight for a long period of time, and it might be because you were having babies and trying to like keep a family afloat and all that, and it's just what you had to do. Like there's a lot of reasons why people end up in a state like that don't have anything to do with them not having self-control or not taking care of themselves. And yeah, if you do all the right things and just you get healthier and you feel better, because when you do the right things, you'll always be healthier and feel better. But the body composition doesn't shift. You add that GLP-1 in, as you know, even at just again, like a microdose. And if you're patient, right? And over time, what you see is that the body begins to go back to where, it begins to become reflective of your inputs, what you're actually doing. And I do think some of that has to do with the fact that as we age, GLP-1 goes down, just like
Right.
stem cells go down, just like DHEA goes down, just like IGF-1 goes down, right? As we age, our level of GLP-1 signal is deteriorating. And so I think that you could make the case from a longevity perspective that virtually every human could benefit from at least a microdose of GLP-1 for many purposes, maintaining optimal body composition, reducing inflammation across almost all tissues, maintaining insulin sensitivity and metabolic function, reducing oxidative stress in the brain. But the Oh, and then the studies, as you may be aware of, showing kidney regeneration, heart protection, and then
Hmm.
brain protection. So as a preventative for big movers on human mortality, heart disease, brain diseases, neurodegenerative diseases, and kidney disease to some extent, we now know for a fact that these peptides reduce those risks. So
Yeah, the cardiovascular one was big. It was like 30% reduction in
The
cardiovascular
the more
disease.
the more recent data on neurodegenerative, which we'll have more coming, had to do with
Hmm.
diabetics who were either on GLP-1s or not, and then looking at primary Alzheimer's diagnoses, and it was 40 to 70% reduction in that diagnosis
Wow.
who were on a
Yeah.
GLP.
Yeah.
And
Well, and
so
that's the impact probably on the glucose and the insulin with the brain, but it goes beyond that, doesn't
yeah,
it? It's not just about
I
reduction
think it's
of
I think it's the
insulin.
neuroinflammation and oxidative
Yeah.
stress along
Yeah.
with the improved because they accounted for variables in terms of like relative A1Cs, glycemic control, et
Yeah.
cetera. But yeah, reducing insulin resistance in the brain is a little bit different than reducing it in the rest of the body. And GLP-1 definitely does help to do that.
Yeah.
You can end up having a higher like glucose, like a higher glycemic variability within your brain than you necessarily are having in other tissues. And that is slowly accumulating damage, right, in the microcirculation into the function of those neurons and glial cells that are keeping your brain healthy and functioning well. There's so many like little rabbit holes we could go down, but
Oh yeah, there's so many.
I don't know if we have time, if it'd be
Yeah.
helpful just to walk through the legs of the table of the body composition approach. I don't know
Yeah.
if that's helpful or not. If
Yeah.
it is,
Yeah.
I can do that. So I've learned this over 20 years trying to help people lose weight in my medical practice for their health, right? And having so many of the protocols I developed work until they didn't. Right. And now for years, what we're seeing is that this protocol is working over and over and over again. It's reproducible. And, again, for somebody who needs to lose fat, but keep their muscle, like it's really a simple formula. to lose the fat, and again, let's say we've accounted for hormones and toxin, like all those other
Okay.
variables, sleep and stress are accounted for. So we're just focusing on these inputs. You have to create an energy deficit for your body to catabolize fat. You can do that through increasing metabolic rate. You can do that through reducing your food intake. You can use both, but you ultimately have to create a meaningful energy deficit so that your body will begin to use your own stored energy. So we absolutely, when we start individuals on a body composition protocol with or without GLP-1, we create a anticipated calorie deficit for them, an energy deficit. And so if we could estimate that their metabolic rate was 2,500 calories, we may take them under 1,800 a day. But sometimes we'll see that that's just not catalyzing the adaptation. So maybe we take them under 1,500 for a period of time until we see that, okay, now the body is beginning to respond to this signal and it's beginning to catabolize its own fat to fill this deficit. So those targets vary based on male, female, age, current estimated metabolic rates, current, eating volumes. Like how are we going to do it? If we add the GLP-1, it gets a lot easier because now they can tolerate a low calorie diet without the discomfort that they historically had. So whatever the case, you have to create an energy deficit. You do. If you
Mhm.
go on a GLP-1 and now I guess the difference would be like your case where you're menopausal and that's had these hard to measure metabolic effects and energy balance effects, and all you do is introduce the GLP-1 and you lose the weight. So there's cases like that. But for most people, ultimately, it's going to be you're going to have to create this kind of energy deficit that is sustained over enough time to have the body begin to enter into the process of catabolizing its own fat. Now, so we create that, and then the other aspect of their diet that I care about, other than it clean, stop poisoning yourself. We always emphasize that is protein, right? Like, let's just center the diet
Yeah.
around protein. We know that individuals who are trying to lose body fat, independent of even muscle, one way or the other, the higher the protein content, the better they do, right? The less
Yeah.
hungry they are, the healthier they feel,
Definitely.
the less hormone downregulation, immune downregulation we see. So we'll set a protein target that depends on that individual, but it's pretty robust, And so the typical wisdom is to most of the time try to have 1 gram of protein per pound of ideal body weight. Not,
Mhm.
what your weight is, but your ideal body weight. So if you ideal body weight's 120 pounds, you try to get 120 grams of protein a day. And that's just for maintaining and being healthy and going on about your business. Now, we know that the body maintains a circulating amino acid pool. It has reserve protein. Our ancestors certainly couldn't have just had that kind of consistency. So I tell people, look, it's okay if a couple of days a week, you lay off because it can be hard to get
Oh,
that
it
level
can.
every day. And I'm like, your body will do fine. But, while
Yeah.
you're trying to move the needle on body comp, let's try to hit it as much as we can because it's going to help you a lot. And so
Yes.
we'll set that at, a little over, depending on where their ideal body weight. If their ideal body weight is 180 pounds, we're probably going to cap at 180 grams of protein. There aren't any studies suggesting going any higher than that's going to do you any good. But
Yeah.
most people will be between 120 to 180 grams of protein a day. And we're like, if you're not going to hit this protein target, then do not do this, period. Right? Don't go and do this process. I'm not going to put you on a GLP-1 unless I have your commitment to this protein target, period.
Ah,
Right? And then
nice.
you can
Nice.
yeah, and then you can
Yeah.
meet that protein target through any combination of food protein, supplemental protein powders, as long as
Yeah.
they're good quality, and essential amino acid supplementation.
That's
So,
what we say. Yeah.
yeah. And so if you're going to use
Non-negotiables.
yeah, but so most people will opt, especially if they're on a GLP-1 and not that hungry, they will opt to use essential amino acids. So they could
Yeah.
use 2 or 3 portions a day, a standard portion, 20, 25 grams protein equivalent, and they can count that towards their protein target. And then
Yeah.
they have to fill the remainder gap with food and supplemental protein. So the protein target, the calorie target. I'm like, if you want to fill the rest of that with fat or carb, I really don't care as long as it's
Yeah.
clean, right? Because your body is going to catabolize the energy at this point. You're in a energy deficit. So honestly, if they're insulin resistant and then maybe it's helpful to go low carb for a period of time so we can lower insulin faster, which will accelerate their fat loss. If we can get insulin normalized, they're going to lose weight easier than when insulin is high. So maybe if in those individuals, we're going to say, well, let's go with less carb. But if they don't have a lot of bad metabolic signal, they'll typically feel better and do better having complex carbs as part of their diet. And we know that over time, if you have some consistency of complex carbs, you're less likely to see thyroid downregulation and
Yes.
down regulation. So I
Yeah.
encourage them, as long as the sourcing is good, to enjoy some carbs, provided they're staying under that calorie target. And so we're like, that's it. That's all we want you to think about for your diet. The sourcing, your calorie target, and your protein target. If you can hit those, then the rest of it we're just not going to pay much attention to unless we're not seeing results. And then there's the next piece that if all you did is create the energy deficit, but you don't maintain your metabolic rate, your body is going to reduce your metabolic rate. So like the physical activity, right? And so we're like, you're going to have to maintain high metabolic rate through physical activity, which again is a combination of, it could be cardiopulmonary training and interval training, activities like yoga, Pilates. These all count. They're all gonna, burn calories and they're all good for you. But the one that you have to do for sure is resistance training. Like you
Yep.
have to have that, and you have to at least meet the minimal target of signal to maintain muscle mass. If all you want to do is keep the muscle you have, then that's typically 6 sets per body part per week of a resistance training exercise. Right? That's what the science has suggested, that if you get 6 sets per week per body part, you will likely create enough stimulus to keep your muscle. Now, that study wasn't done in a context of low calorie, though. So I favor going above that. But if you want to add muscle, you have to get to at least 10 sets per body part. Now, that could be that 3 days a week you do a full body workout and do 3 to 4 sets for each body part, right? So we're not talking about extraordinary lengths you
Yeah.
have to go. But if you don't resistance train and progressively overload, even with adequate protein in a low energy, in an energy deficit, your body will still catabolize muscle because that's what it's trained to do, right? It is
Right.
trained to catabolize muscle. We're able to kind of throw a wrench in the works with our use of the amino acids and keeping in ancestral times, if you didn't have enough food to eat, you didn't have enough protein. Period. Those two went hand in hand,
Yep.
right? And so you were in a situation where you had an energy deficit and a protein deficit, and you needed to go find food. Now we can actually create the energy deficit while we maintain optimal protein. That's a
Yes.
wrinkle to the human system, right? So we're
Yeah.
able to use that. And then we can keep the metabolic rate up through our physical activity and our resistance training. So if you resistance train your muscle, like your nervous system, again, it's just responding to the inputs. And it doesn't know the difference between the nervous system at the like non subconscious levels. It doesn't know the difference between this is a conscious thing I'm doing voluntarily versus this is something I have to do. It just figures everything you're doing is something you have to do. And if
Hmm.
every day, if multiple times a week you have to push heavy things around, your nervous system receives that information as it's necessary for survival that we're able to maintain a certain amount of capacity for pushing heavy things around. And it will
Yes.
not, and if it's got protein, and it's got calories, which the calorie source is your own body, right? It's got calories coming that it can use. And then it has the input of that resistance training. It will not catabolize muscle. It'll even build muscle.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
And the GLP-1s, as you told me before we started
yeah,
to record, can be anabolic,
not
not
catabolic.
catabolic.
Not catabolic. Catabolic to fat, but anabolic for bone and potentially muscle. And so, again, our food approach has been low calorie, adequate protein, and nutrient optimized. I didn't say that,
Yeah.
but obviously
Nutrient
that's
dense.
we've got a nutrient stack we've put them on that accounts for not just vitamins and minerals, but phospholipids, essential fatty acids, fat soluble nutrients. We add in CoQ10 as well for mitochondrial support. So we got a nutrient stack that we're saying, okay, you're going to take these every day. This is part of your food, right? This is because this is what you body is looking for from food. And you're going to use potentially essential amino acids. You're going to hit this protein target, and then you're going to have your calorie deficit, and then you're going to have your physical activity to maintain metabolic rate and to keep muscle. It's that simple. Right.
Hmm.
And it works, right? It
Hmm.
works over and over again. Now, there'll be a point to where your body has catabolized a lot of fat, and your energy balance then goes through a recalibration, and those are plateaus. And people might hit that plateau and just need, if they've lost 20 or 30 pounds, but they have 20 more to go, they may need to wait a month and just keep
Yeah.
the right inputs. And then eventually, once that calibration has occurred and the body is not sensing, oh, it's getting scary out there, it will allow you to start losing more fat again. Sometimes you have to push the metabolic rate higher and move into concepts like calorie flux. Calorie flux is
Hmm.
basically the total of the amount of calories you consumed and the amount of calories you burned, the two put together. So if I consumed 1,000 calories a day and I burned 1,500, my calorie flux is 2,500. That'd be a low flux, of course, for a lot of people, but that's my total calorie flux. So you could take somebody and have them on a 1,500 calorie diet, or let's say 1,000 calorie diet, and having them burn 2,000 calories a day. Okay, so they've got 1,000 calorie deficit and a 3,000 calorie flux. You could take another individual and put them on a 1,500 calorie diet and have them burn 2,500 calories a day. Okay, so they've got 1,000 calorie deficit, same as the other person, but now they've got a 4,000 calorie flux. Which one is going to lose more weight over time? The one with the higher calorie flux. So that's where we're like, you may need to eat more and just simply
Right.
push in harder to your fitness. Keep
Right.
your energy deficit the same. We're not going to, stretch that at all. We're simply going to take it all up a notch. And that will actually send signals, reassuring signals to the brain, and you will end up being able to push through and lose weight. And so a lot of times people's inclination is, I'll eat less, right? And that might not be the right move to break through a plateau. It's often the wrong move. It's either,
Yeah.
yeah, stay stable with your eating and push in on your fitness, or bring both up like in a very similar way, and then just
Yeah.
increase that calorie flux, that all overall energy flow through the human body. And so
Yeah.
that what we'll typically find is that if we just stay patient, we don't need to go up on the GLP-1 dose. We don't need to radically shift things. We just need to give people time. Now,
Yeah.
once they're getting to like an optimal body composition for them, so a man gets down to 12 or 13% body fat, right? Now the rules change back to baseline, right? Like now suddenly the body, because now your reserve of hydrocarbon energy is depleted. You're at a relatively lean, healthy level. So now we can't really play the same tricks on the body we've been playing with our protocol, right? Ultimately, we're going to, at that point, you're either going to have to choose, do you want to lean or do you want to bulk? And you kind
Yeah.
of get in. But you're at a healthy body composition. So it really doesn't matter at that point. And that's where once people reach their target and they're at a really healthy body comp, I'm like, you just have to relax now, right? You
Yeah.
have to relax. And like you talked about earlier, be comfortable eating more food, keep your metabolic rate up. You're like, look at your labs, your insulin and your glucose and your lipids and your hormones. All this is beautiful data. Your body is healthy. Like, be comfortable in it. Go enjoy food, maintain a physical activity, eat clean, and they do not have any problem sustaining the change in body composition they achieved. I know I just kind of like went blah 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 blah,
Hmm. Do
but
you
it's
find that a lot of your patients are coming off of the GLP-1s, or are you finding that they kind of have to stay at that small
most
microdose?
of them, the ones who had serious, uh, eating challenges, just psychological
Yeah. Yeah.
challenges and high sugar addiction, maybe they're going to stay on a low dose.
Yeah.
They need the leverage because the food environment they're living in has not changed. So they need the leverage. Most choose to come off and then maybe cycle back onto very low doses for holidays or just little windows of time where they want to push in a little bit. Now with the things we've talked about with kidney, heart, brain, inflammation, I would favor taking them to a microdose and saying just stay on that microdose.
Hmm. What do you consider a microdose for
Well,
semaglutide and tirzepatide?
some would say this is too high of a dose, but from my perspective, a microdose is either one quarter of the starting dose, or I would say one half of the starting dose could be considered. Maybe technically that's not a microdose, but it's a very light dose, right? So
Hmm.
one quarter,
Hmm.
one half. So if it was semaglutide, 0.25 is your starting dose, you're at 0.125 or even possibly 0.675. The logistical challenges at that point of administering doses that low becomes a little bit challenging, right? In
Yeah.
terms of your
Yeah. If it's
consistently.
compounded, it's
Yeah,
possible.
because you can't do this with the traditional drugs. They're coming in a
No, they're in
pen.
a
It's
pen.
automated. You have no choice but to go to at least the starting dose. And by the way, if you get prescribed Ozempic for weight loss, there's an automatic dose titration they're going to put you on. It's the instructions are going to be 0.25 for 4 weeks, zero point 0.5, and like
Yes.
you're going to end up at 1 milligrams before you realize what was happening. And it's like you probably didn't need all of that.
No.
If you're attentive to the types of variables that we've discussed in this podcast, you should not need to do that.
No, no. I always tell people don't raise your dose unless you've maybe plateaued for a few weeks or a week, but
Yes,
give it a chance. Like you don't want to wear out those receptors
that's
and
right.
you want to stay tolerant to it. And even if people plateau for a while, we'll actually recommend, cut back on your dose for a while.
Yes,
Don't try and lose weight.
yes,
Just go to a microdose for a couple of weeks and then titrate back up, and it'll probably initiate the weight again
that's
and do
right.
other
That's
things.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That's exactly right. Like oftentimes it's counterintuitive. People are nervous. I understand that. For the first time ever, they've had success. They've got
Hmm.
leverage on their eating behavior. They don't want to fall back to where they were, but ultimately they have to have confidence. They need to restore confidence in their body, right?
Hmm.
And that's the kind of work that you do and I do. I think that might be the most meaningful thing that's produced through all of this. Sure, they get healthier and there's all these ways you can measure that, but that they are no longer like befuddled. I guess I'm destined to be sick. My body is frail. It's just, it's diseases are just par for the course, or symptoms of diseases, fatigue and brain fog. And instead, a restored confidence that their body can actually be quite healthy and serve them well. And
Hmm.
that they should expect that of their body if they're giving it what it needs to do so. And now you start becoming you recognize there's something wrong, whether again it's a loss of energy or brain fog or mood issues or gut issues. You're not just like, oh, okay, I guess I'll get on a pharmaceutical for IBS. You recognize, no, 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 there's something faulty in my inputs. Let's figure it out, get
Hmm.
it fixed, and health will be restored, and I will feel good again.
Hmm. Now, before I let you go, just because I said I was going to talk to you about it, quickly, you've been using these now for 10 years in your practice. How often are you seeing the horror stories that we hear about, like stomach paralysis,
Yes.
pancreatitis, that kind of like,
Well, I'm
I haven't
glad.
seen them. So,
Yeah, no, this is really important. So
hmm.
back in the beginning, when we started using the first iterations, and we were just dose titrating up, and then if the A1C stopped responding, we would go up on the dose again. I didn't have the same understanding then that I have now. Um, we would see people get really constipated, really nauseated, have terrible indigestion and reflux. I've never seen a case of was certainly not permanent gastroparesis. I don't think there's a single one reported that if you do develop uh, gastroparesis from these drugs, that it will reverse as you withdraw
Yeah,
the drug. But most of the people using these drugs have diabetes. Diabetes is the biggest risk factor for gastroparesis. Same thing with pancreatitis, same thing with biliary dysfunction and gallbladder issues. Obesity and diabetes are the biggest risk factors. So these are people who already have a substantially increased risk for these conditions. It doesn't appear that the drug is really contributing to that, but it is delaying gastric emptying. My anesthesiology friends will tell me about. Now, if you're getting ready for surgery, and they're gonna and maybe you're not going to disclose you're using a compounded GLP-1, but you should, because what the
yeah,
anesthesiologist is going to say is, I want you to stop that 2 weeks before surgery. And you're like, no, I don't want to, but you better, because what they're seeing is there's still contents in the stomach the next day, right? After somebody's eaten their dinner. And then that becomes aspiration risk. It's a problem. And
yeah,
so, and so it absolutely is slowing gastric emptying. But if you use a gut protocol, and again, we have both the body composition ebook, which just
yeah,
describes just as a written walkthrough of what we went through a moment ago. But we also have what we call our GLP-1 playbook, which we're happy for your listeners to be able to
yeah. I
download.
downloaded it.
Okay, good. So
Yeah, yeah.
right? Yeah. So we
I'll link
have
to it.
yeah, so we have all of that written out, and we're like, here's our gut protocol, because you've got to feed your gut still. You've got trillions of microorganisms that are living off of what you're putting into your body, along with all your cells, depending upon it too. And a big part of what the trillions of microorganisms need are essential nutrients, just like we need essential nutrients. So I'm going to keep banging that drum. Find a method to optimize essential nutrients,
Yes.
period.
Yeah.
But the so with the gut, I know we're going to see a reduced digestive function issue. So we've got our patients, typically we've got them on digestive enzymes, good quality digestive enzymes, so they eat so they can digest more efficiently. Mindfulness of eating, slow down, chew thoroughly, enjoy your food. Do not gulp food down. You will be
Hmm.
uncomfortable if you do. That will
Yes.
create, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then typically we'll also often have them, if they're trying to lose a lot of weight, on some type of bile quality support, so some type of
Yeah.
bile receptor or TUDCA to help with the
Yes.
biliary flow. So that's typically part of our protocol. And if they're not going to eat a lot of food and they're not going to eat fermented foods, we'll have them on probiotics, like a high colony count across the broad base of like Lactobacillus bifidobacter and a couple of others. Because we're like, we got to maintain that biome. We got to maintain that gut function. And then for if they are experiencing some constipation, and many people will, even at low
Yep.
dose, then we've got them on proper fiber supplementation, which is part of feeding the gut as well. And we'll use like magnesium citrate typically. And that combination of the fiber, hydration, and magnesium citrate, that typically eradicates any issues with constipation,
Yep.
especially when you're staying at the low doses. At the low dose,
Yes.
other than a little indigestion here or there, right, I do not get reports of any significant side effects at the low doses.
Yeah. No, us
Even the
either.
low, but even the low doses, we say use the gut protocol, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
and then the feedback we get is, wow, now I've got this nutritional stack, including essential amino acids. I've got this TUDCA, I've got digestive enzymes, I got probiotics, I've got magnesium. Man, that's a whole lot to keep up with, and it costs money. And I'm like, yeah, but look at the difference in your food budget, right? You're
Yeah.
about to eat a lot less food, so you're probably going to come out square or possibly in the black on that one. And then also the time and effort and cost of retrieving food, preparing food, consuming food. Like I just like you have to change your mindset around these little supplement stacks. Like you have to be like, oh my gosh, I can do all this for my body without having to go through hunting and foraging and all this other stuff. Like just, the 45 seconds it takes to swallow a portion of essential amino acids is nothing compared to what it takes to go consume a chicken breast, right? Or a
Yeah.
piece of beef
Yeah.
or a thing of beans or something like that. And once we
Yeah.
kind of help them get their mind around it, then they embrace the regimen. They recognize they're not spending more money because it's a food offset, it's cost offset for food.
Which is
And
so
they're,
expensive right now.
yes, and they're not spending as much time on I got to go find food, I got to prepare food, I've got to eat food. Instead, they're delivering this into their system. And then they realize this is actually quite easy and efficient, which means
Mhm.
also when they finish, they want to continue some level of supplementation to keep maintaining their gut health and nutrient availability, which even those who are uber healthy at good body comps, unless they're on that regenerative farm, they need to maintain ongoing gut support and ongoing nutrient support, period.
Yeah. Yeah. And I almost think like if you're not willing to purchase those things and stay on top of those things, you might not want to do it
Right.
because I really feel like it needs to be part of it to do this safely and properly and keep your nutrient stores up, which is so critical for your health.
Yes, exactly. And that's
Yeah.
where I go with it. Because, like, look at the outcomes for people who aren't doing it this way. For the most part, they've lost a lot of muscle. Their skin is saggy. They don't feel good. They've got constipation. They've got reflux. It's not a pleasant place to end up just to lose 40 pounds. It's like, you know,
No.
so you just do this. Yet still, there's just a certain portion of our population, and I mean this, God bless them. I'm not saying they're bad people or just fools or something like that. They just can't get there in their mindset. They're like, no,
Hmm.
I just don't want to bother with all that. I'm just going to inject
Hmm.
myself with the drug,
Yep.
and
Yep.
and it's
And there's going to be
okay.
those. Oh, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah.
And I don't know what's worse. I was thinking about this last night, thinking about our talk today, and I was like, what's worse? The person that's obese, that let's say they're 300 pounds and they sit on a couch and they've got food addiction and they're eating terribly, to leave them like that or put in a GLP-1, even though they're not going to change any of their lifestyle, but at least they'll maybe be better off on the inside because it'll be helping with their metabolic issues. I don't know. I don't know, you
I know.
know,
But ultimately, why not just go ahead and embrace the holistic process and get the best
because it's
result?
a good time to do it because your brain just shuts off. Like I've had to not take my micro dose for a few weeks just so I could just go enjoy some sugar again.
I know. I know. And that's another thing. I'm like, look, I'm very disciplined in how I approach nutrition for my own body. Very, very disciplined about it. And I have a cycle of the week, and people have their different patterns where it's just go time. It's time to work and push into my responsibilities and care of my body. And I'm going to typically be lower calorie, low food, high quality workouts. And then weekends, we get together with families who love to cook great food, and
Yeah.
they might make chocolate mousse, right? And I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I can enjoy it. I'm going to
Exactly.
and I'm going to enjoy it. And it's really pleasurable. And I love it. And I have a great experience. But then when I get back into this other portion of my week, it's just not in my thought process. It's not time for feasting. It's time for other
I do
things.
that too.
Yeah, everybody finds their way to their own rhythm of that, but that's where we really should be. Food doesn't shouldn't be used as a drug, right?
Hmm.
I do think it's a great for the feasting part. That it's a great party drug for those times, like
Yeah.
the food, right, and chocolate mousse and all of that. But it shouldn't be a party drug all week long, right? It shouldn't be the
No.
way you recover from your hard morning is to go eat, a big sub sandwich and a bag of chips and a cookie and drink a soda. That is not serving you.
No, no, nor do I want to do that. But
No.
yeah. So are you still, do you take patients actively? Can people work with you? Tell us what you got.
Yeah, so in a lot of ways, we're probably very similar to you. We've got an ecosystem of health, myself, another physician, a PA, and then health coaches. And so some individuals might say, "Hey, I want to go in depth, and I want a toxicant test, and intracellular nutrient test, and metabolomics and genetics." And they be like, "And I don't mind spending the money with them." Yeah, they can possibly, sign up and work with me, and we'll do all that, and we'll go deep, and we'll use all these protocols and more other peptides and other tools. But then other individuals who may have budget limitations on what they can invest, we have approaches with our health coaches where they are like, I do need some data. I need a gut test, a nutrient evaluation. I'd like to get my hormones tested. We can do all that for them. It's under my oversight. I look at all the data that's passing through, but then I advise the health coach, here would be the best protocol for this individual. And so there's a lot of different ways to engage with our practice to try and get, help getting where you're trying to go with your health. So yes, we
Mhm.
still take patients at our clinic.
Yeah, and you're still like just a good old family doctor too. We were
Yes,
talking about
that's right.
that prior to this. Is you still practice medicine? You have kind of the best of both worlds, and I love that. When I looked at your website this morning, I loved the look of the year-long program. It was
Yes,
super like intense. Like you got
yes,
everything. You went
yes.
through it all.
It's a capitated fee. It includes the data. It's a lot of expensive data, and it's all my care for a year, right? It's just like I'm
Yeah.
invested. Fully invested in you in this year, and most of the patients who end up engaging with us, they'll just whether they renew at the highest level or they renew at more of a maintenance level, they'll just tend to stay in the system and continue. And we're also probably like you. We're always advancing the new metabolomics test.
Metabolomics. Yeah.
Yeah, that we've got neural engines and AI looking at because you're looking at a lot of complex metabolites, and so your interpretations are challenging. The new gut testing that'll be coming out, which will be just a whole evolutionary leap forward in our ability to really assess that gut environment. And then
Oh,
when those things cross-pollinate and we can
yeah.
actually look at it meaningfully together, we're gonna be at a whole new level of diagnostic capacities and being able to identify biochemical deficiencies and begin to nudge that system back into where it needs to go. So there's a continual evolution, and I'm sure it's the same with you, Karen, where we're not stopping here. We
No.
are excited about the new diagnostic technologies, novel peptides, novel molecules, all the different interventions, technology, PEMF and photobiomodulation and
Yeah.
hyperbarics, like all the different tools that we can use. And so every year, my patients are used to this now. It's like, okay, I'm getting ready for all these tests you're going to do. Now there's a new one, right?
Yeah,
It's like this is
yeah.
our model now. This is it. We got more data. We're going to be even better. Like, so it's
Yeah.
fun. So much fun to work in this side of healthcare.
It really is. I would love to do something like that instead of just like, okay, I'll do a gut test and then a year later I might do a hormone test. And then
Yes.
like just to have it all done and have somebody go through it all with you and be like, this is where you're lacking. This is what you need. This is what's happening. And having that kind of functional as well as just medical system just coming all together. I
Yeah.
think, I don't know, there's something to be said about that. So I can really appreciate that. Well, we'll link to everything in the show notes. You've been fantastic. Thank you so much for this information. I love talking about that that whole functional, holistic view of weight loss. I think it's so important and taking it also from that hunter gatherer, like what we're wired for on the inside. I've always come from that standpoint.
Yeah.
Always.
I
Yeah.
look at everything through this anthropological lens.
Same.
And I believe that if we could go back and live in the body and mind of a evolved hunter-gatherer, right, after they started killing large animals and growing their brains and bodies, we wouldn't want to stay in that lifestyle because it'd be brutal and hard and we'd probably die
Yeah.
young. But if we
Yeah.
could experience the capacities of that body, like the epigenetic expression, we'd be like, holy cow, how do I get that? Right? Like that's
Yes.
amazing. And that's kind of the track I'm on is that kind of recovery of all those lost potentials because of where we've gone with the bad side of some of our progress. But I
Yeah.
also I'm not leaving it at just hunter-gatherers. I think that there's all kinds of untapped potentials encoded into our DNA that's just waiting to be expressed. And
Yes.
I'm not talking about weird I'm not talking about transhumanism stuff, and I'm just talking about what the innate, like what the capacities are of a human being. I think it's
Yeah.
so
I think
yeah.
we've only scratched the surface. And I think
Yeah.
there's so many things right now in medicine that like the technology is getting so advanced and these GLP-1 medications, I think they're changing the entire medical
Yes,
system. Like
they are.
it's nuts. But then you have all these other little tools and technology. But then on the other side of things, we're seeing a lot of like we got to regress to progress. I just had a great conversation about the benefits of UVB rays for heaven's sakes and like how like we've got to get outside. We're so sick because we're not seeing sunlight.
Yes,
You
that's
know, like
correct.
just something that simple, like it's been around forever. But anyways, we'll probably just sit here and talk all day. So I will let you go and respect your time. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. And I look forward to having you back.
Thank you, Karen. It really has been a privilege and honor to have this conversation with you and to your audience. So thank you all.